One direct consequence of Russia's attack on Ukraine has been skyrocketing oil prices. During past energy shocks, the U.S. had reliable allies in the Gulf to help ease any crisis. As the world faced its latest oil crunch, the U.S. reached out to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates to increase their production. But President Joe Biden didn't get the reaction he might have been looking for. Hadia Al-Alawi reports.
After hinting that he wanted to disengage America from the Middle East, President Joe Biden is turning to the region for help. He wants Saudi Arabia and the UAE to increase their oil production to contain a global price surge and bail the US and EU out of their oil crunch. But the Gulf countries are not ready to make that call. De facto leaders Saudi Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman and the UAE's Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan reportedly both declined requests to speak to Biden in recent weeks. The two have had frosty relations with Washington since Biden took office, a stark contrast to their relation with the previous Trump administration. Biden has repeatedly criticized bin Salman over the killing of Saudi journalist Jamal Khashoggi in Istanbul in 2018 and refused to engage in direct talks with him after taking office last year. He has also spoken out against the Saudi-led campaign in Yemen, which has cost hundreds of thousands of lives. But Washington needs Riyadh now. A production increase by the world's top oil exporters would provide a much-needed boost to lower prices.
What we're trying to do is mitigate the impact. And you've seen, of course, the price of oil go down a little bit. And the president will continue to look at a range of steps that he can take, whether it is engaging through his team or through even himself personally with big global producers, or it is looking at a range of domestic options.
Riyadh and Abu Dhabi are members of OPEC, a bloc of 13 countries that control 40% of global oil production. Last week, the UAE signaled it would encourage OPEC to consider higher production levels, which led to a slight drop in prices, but no action to increase supply followed the statement.
I think there was just an announcement a short while ago, I'm not sure if it's been made publicly yet, about Emirati support for increased production when it comes to OPEC Plus, which I think is an important thing to stabilize global energy markets, to make sure that there remains an abundant supply of energy around the world.
2 weeks into Russia's attack on Ukraine, the US imposed a ban on Russian oil, but the EU is choosing to phase it out of its markets by the end of the year, largely because it depends more heavily on it. Russia says it is considering a response.
Energy is our weapon. We should announce limits on energy exports. We all know the conflict between Russia and Western countries is not an economic conflict, but a conflict of principles. This is our weapon, not theirs.
Until now, OPEC has resisted calls from the US and its allies to ramp up production. Last week, the organization warned that there was no single source that could replace the 7 million barrels a day that Russia exports. Hopes of reaching a ceasefire agreement between Moscow and Kiev and easing supply worries contributed to a price drop earlier in the week. But with no end in sight to the conflict in Ukraine, the impact of soaring energy prices will likely continue to be felt. Hadia Al-Alawi, Straight Talk.
And joining me now to unpack this from London is Alex Schindler. He is the president of Energy Intelligence, and Kate Dorian, a non-resident fellow at the Arab Gulf States Institute and contributing editor at MEES, a weekly Middle East oil and gas news platform. A warm welcome to you both, and thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk. Kate, let me begin with you. How do you think the Ukraine crisis is impacting Middle East energy politics right now? I mean, is it affecting the traditional balance in the region?
I think it was something that started before the Ukraine crisis. If you look at the sort of the demand center, it was all east rather than west. And I think that's changed now because, the Europeans, the Americans are looking for alternatives to Russian oil. Mm-hmm. We haven't seen a major disruption yet, but I think, the threat of a disruption of oil and gas from Russia, plus the fact that the European Union, the US, the UK want to reduce their reliance on Russian oil, is going to change geopolitics. It depends on whether the the OPEC, the Middle Eastern OPEC countries want to retain the relationship with Russia within OPEC Plus, or or whether they're going to actually respond to calls to put more oil on the market.
Yeah, so we haven't seen the new normal yet, but Alex, the U.S. has reached out to Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates as oil prices soared amid this Ukraine crisis. But Biden seems to have failed to engage with both de facto leaders of these two countries. Has Russia's attack on Ukraine forced Biden to rethink and reverse his policies towards the Gulf? Because when he first became president, he said he would isolate the Saudi crown prince.
Yeah, it's a good question, Aisha. I think, what we've seen in this period is a reversal, not just on the sort of geopolitics and the human rights questions that the Biden administration had raised about Saudi Arabia. It's also the approach to hydrocarbons. Because if you remember, when the Biden administration came in, they're very much focused on moving swiftly away from oil and gas and moving on to other energy sources that were cleaner, in line with the climate change goals.
Yes.
Now, obviously, the Saudis sort of heard that sort of policy and were sort of questioning the long-standing relationship between the U.S. and the kingdom, the sort of energy for security swap that's been in place for a half a century. So I think that's been the reversal on the approach to hydrocarbons and the importance to get more hydrocarbons on the market. I think that has forced the U.S. to come back and ask Saudi Arabia to potentially put more oil on the market, which is something that we were not hearing from the Biden administration when they came into office.
So, Kate, we have seen throughout past oil and energy crises, the Saudis were regularly, they intervened to help ease these shocks. Why haven't they increased the production this time around? What kind of message they're trying to give both to the U.S. and Russia?
I think partly because they don't want to be dictated to. They don't want the Americans or the EU to tell them what they should be doing. They've maintained that the market is that the current high price is due to geopolitical tensions rather than fundamentals. I think they want to wait and see the actual impacts of the sanctions on Russia before they release more oil. But and the problem, I think they're worried about the relationship with Russia going forward. There aren't that many countries within the OPEC Plus alliance that can actually increase production. So it's going to be rather difficult to actually calculate who can. I mean, it's only, if you look at it, it's only Saudi Arabia and the UAE that can increase production. And their argument is it won't really make a difference because it's all geopolitical.
So on the other hand, Alex, we have heard reports that Saudi Arabia has floated the idea of accepting yuan instead of dollar for oil sales to China. How significant of a move would be, and what impact it would have to the global markets and to the U.S. as well?
Yeah, I mean, if this was actually happening, it would be hugely significant. Obviously, the U.S. dollar has underpinned the dollar trade in oil for decades and decades. It goes back to that oil for security point I was making. So if the Saudis are willing to sell oil in yuan, that would be a major shift. And I think we've all seen the headlines of the last couple of days that came from the Wall Street Journal that this was something that was being discussed, maybe being dusted off in 2016. I think it's worth pointing out this idea has been in place for a number of years. We've talked, I mean, I'm sure Kate has heard this many times, sort of moving away from the dollar for trade in oil. It's very, very difficult to do so. It's very, very political to do so. And so when we've looked into this, I think the discussions are not really at a serious level right now. So I think this is more signaling
Kate,
from the...
Kate, would you agree with Alex? I mean, is this such a viable plan, or is just politicking?
No, I think it is politicking. I think it's a message to Biden, basically saying, we have other friends, and I think it's unlikely. The Saudi currency is pegged to the dollar, as is the the UAEs. I mean, if you look at it yesterday, the Fed increases rates, the Saudi central bank does the same. So I think it's probably a trial balloon. It has been discussed before, but I don't think they are, they have too many interests as well, and they're heavily invested in the US, in treasuries, in other types of investments. So I doubt that it'll happen. But again, you can't rule it out. But they haven't denied it, they haven't confirmed it, and it was only one report, so I wouldn't take it that seriously.
So it's kind of a wait-and-see approach from both Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. But do the Gulf countries have capacity to offset disruptions caused by sanctions on Russia over Ukraine? I mean, can they make up for the gap left by Russian oil?
The gap at the moment is, we're not really sure because some of the pipeline flows are still normal. A seaborne trade is being affected a little bit because it's harder, but the IEA says it could be up to 3 million barrels a day. That would be easily made up for because there is about just over 4 million barrels per day of spare capacity held by Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Kuwait and the UAE, but the two main ones are the UAE and Saudi Arabia. But again, that would mean they would be pumping at full capacity, and that there would be no spare production capacity, and that in itself would be bullish for the market because stocks are also falling, global inventories. So I think it's that they're sort of like damned if they do and damned if they don't. But the market needs some calming. It needs a signal that they're willing to take action if necessary.
So, Alex, how could OPEC countries, especially we've just mentioned the UAE and Saudi Arabia, boost oil production without aggravating Russia?
Well, I think it's very difficult. I agree with Kate. I mean, that there isn't a lot of spare to sort of put on the market. I mean, I think we pegged the spare capacity a bit lower than what Kate said, at 4 million. I think we're sort of not quite sure that they can add even 2.5 to 3 million barrels a day of extra oil from Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates. So, I mean, that suggests that they're reaching the tops of what they can do. And I agree with what Kate is saying on this point. If you go to the maximum, that starts alarming the market. So I think what they've decided to do right now, which is sit tight, wait and see what this disruption actually looks like. When we look at how much oil has been disrupted from Russia, there were some early indications that there could have been up to 3 million barrels a day that were not making it to market in the first weeks of the invasion. I think that's eased right now. A lot of that oil has gone sort of quietly or under the radar, and it is finding a home now. So I think what OPEC is doing is waiting and seeing how much oil actually makes it to the market, seeing what the shortage actually looks like, and then making a decision when they meet later this month.
An immediate effect on global markets. Kate and Alex, unfortunately, we'll have to leave it here. Thank you very much for joining me on Straight Talk.